Well, a very good morning to you all. As you know, I'm Andrew Carpenter, hosting this series of Friday webinars. You're seeing me in a strange location today. I'm not at home, where I normally am. I'm actually up in the Midlands at my son's house. So that's why you're seeing me in a different location without the headphones and microphone and so on. But you're very welcome. We're expecting 50 odd people today, so just bear with us. We've got the doors open and we're going to give everyone a couple more minutes just to get in. So it's only just after 12 o'clock, so just bear with us. We'll hold on for another 60 seconds or so, if you don't mind. While you're waiting, you might like to go to slido.com and enter the code #LM040222, which is the code for today. And that will enable you to get underway with a series of questions that Ian has asked that we ask you to answer. That gives us a flavour for the knowledge and for our audience today. So if you could go on to LM040222 on slido.com, start answering those questions, that would be most helpful. Thank you. As I say, we'll just give it another 60 seconds, chaps, I think, before we kick in. Right, let's see who we've got. By the way, the other thing you might like to do down in the chat box is just tell us who you are, where you're from, which organisation, which part of the country. That also gives Ian a good flavour of his audience today. So perhaps you'd like to do that in the chat box while we're waiting. That would be very helpful. I know I'm looking through the names now of the attendees, and I know there are others that I know are coming. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to hold on, because I know they were very keen to participate. So we'll just hold on for another few seconds and then we'll get underway. Thank you. Yes, and if you didn't catch what I was saying about Slido, there is now a mention in the chat box. So thanks for that, Abraham. Thanks for putting that in. I think we'll make a start. So a very good afternoon to you. My name is Andrew Carpenter. I am Chief Executive of both the Structural Timber Association and Constructing Excellence in the South West and the Midlands. And I'm joined by hosting these Friday webinars by my colleagues from across the UK within CE and also CIOB in the Southwest. So a myriad of organisations now bringing you what I hope you'll agree are a series of very valuable and useful webinars each and every Friday. Now then, today I'm delighted that we have got Ian Nicholson with us. Ian kindly gave some presentations towards the end of last year at the CE Southwest and Midlands Construction Summits, which were very well received. We've been working alongside the Construction Innovation Hub now for over 12 months on delivering the Value Toolkit in terms of providing information via our regional workshops. We've already had one round of workshops and the second round is underway, with the next one being in the Midlands on the afternoon of the 8th of March. So if you are Midlands based and you would like to input further in workshop terms, then please do sign up to the Value Toolkit workshop, which you can find on the CE Midlands website. So a little bit about Slido. We use it each week, so I'm sure you all know how to use it as well or better than I. But if you are here for the first time, if you'd like to go to slido.com and then enter the code for today, which is #LM040222, that is the code for today. Please answer the questions that are shown. In particular, would you give some thought to question 4, which really is seeking your views on the Value Toolkit in detail from your perspective? And it's that sort of the answer to question 4 that we're hoping will feature during the second part of the presentation when we get to the Q&A session. So I think that's probably enough from me at the time. I'm now going to hand over to Ian. As I say, we've worked with Ian now and his colleagues for a couple of years in terms of the Value Toolkit. We are signed up as Constructing Excellence as official regional partners in terms of us rolling out the value toolkit across the regions. So I'm going to go on to mute, and I'm going to go and turn my camera off, Ian, and I'm going to hand over to you, and I'll be back to lead the Q&A later. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew, and thank you for the invitation to go and speak today. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ian Nicholson. My current role is Value Delivery Lead for the Construction Innovation Hub. I'm employed by BRE, but seconded into the hub to really sort of lead this Value Toolkit project. So what I'm going to do today is give you not a full awareness presentation of what the Value Toolkit is, because that would take up too much of the day, and I suspect a number of you have probably heard presentations elsewhere. As Andrew said, I spoke at both the Southwest and Midlands conferences, and I think others will have heard my colleagues or possibly me talking on in other forums about it. So I'm going to give you a very quick sort of recap overview of the why and what about the Value Toolkit. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process and how we see what we've developed in the Value Toolkit actually influencing outcomes and as we run through the project's life. So I've just got a couple of bits that are different to what people may have seen before that I'll run through and just sort of talk around a little bit, and then we'll get into Q&A and discussion. So we can fill in gaps through questions. So the quick recap: what is the Value Toolkit? So the fundamental aim is to really drive better social and environmental and economic outcomes by implementing this idea of value-based decision making within the construction industry. It comes from the fact that the industry continually focuses on sort of time, cost, quality, and this sort of cheapest capital cost is always the best option type view, and that doesn't deliver on the ever increasing variety of outcomes that our infrastructure and built environment really has to deliver on, whether that be social value, leveling up, net zero, whatever it might be. So the aim is to provide a framework that helps industry sort of bring those sort of social, environmental, economic outcomes together into a broader decision-making framework. So it focuses on both what we deliver, the assets themselves. So are we delivering the right things? Are we solving the right problems in the work in the projects that we're delivering? But it also looks at how we deliver it. Are we delivering it productively, effectively, efficiently, etc.? And it's structured around a series of integrated activities with tools, resources, guidance, and I'll talk a little bit through those elements of those through the rest of the presentation. And one of the key things that it's trying to do is provide a more consistent approach in how we communicate, measure, and realize value. So we're trying to bring a bit more of a standardized language to what value means. It's a very subjective topic, value. So we try and part of what we're trying to do here is sort of give a more consistent approach. So wherever you are in the value chain of a construction project, you understand what's being talked about. So a bit more about why is it needed. As I've said, there's an increasingly complex decision-making environment that we are operating in. Whether you're in the public sector, the degree of policy that is coming out around value, public value, social value, procurement efficiency, all of that sort of stuff is getting more and more complex. So the things you have to do in the public sector are getting incredibly complex. Equally in the private sector, the investment world are looking more and more on the sort of ESG agenda, environmental social governance, their sort of name for all of this stuff. So even in the private sector, more and more investors are starting to focus on, it's not just about pure economic return on investment, it's about these broader social and environmental outcomes as well. So what we're trying to do is helping clients and their teams to align to sector policy. So we're referenced in the construction playbook as a means of actually delivering better value. It's a framework that sort of optimizes the value, helps optimize value, helps you understand what is really important to you in what you're delivering in a project. and helps you put some prioritization on that, which then feeds through into then being able to sort of compare options. It identifies trade-offs as well, and on project outcomes. So there's always sort of balances. You know, what's really more important to me? Is it achieving net zero? Is it employing more apprenticeships? Is it other sort of more social-based things? You know, what's really important to me, and how do I sort of balance that? And I think one of the interesting things is because of the framework that we provide, it helps protect some of those outcomes through the life of a project. I had one conference I spoke at. Somebody said to me, "So Ian, how's this different to value management that we started to introduce back in the 90s?" And I remember doing that. I was working in Anglian Water when value management came along, and you know, I was in value management workshops trying to push the sort of environmental agenda and, you know, resource efficiency and, you know, biodiversity and all of those sorts of things. And the reality is, you know, we'd design something, we'd have some good ideas about what we should do, but as soon as it came to value management, it was about getting more traditional value for better value for money in the traditional sort of time, quality, cost sense. So very often some of these broader issues sort of disappeared and got driven out. But I think what we're doing in helping clients define value and then put that into a rigorous framework helps protect some of that through the life of the project. And I said on the last slide, it's about creating a common language so that we all know what we mean. So we've got a value definition framework, which helps a client understand and define what value means to them using a standard sort of framework and matrix that we can then all understand. And that in turn creates market clarity on expectations and trends so that, you know, we can all act and work to the right goals. So what is it? I said it's a set of process tools guidance supported by a digital platform. And part of this sort of definition of value, this roundel in the middle is becoming very synonymous with what the value toolkit is known for. So the categories around the outside are the sort of value definition framework sort of categories. And what you do by going through the process, you identify which of those categories are most important to you through a prioritization process. Mapped to the drivers that you've got from policy, and that's what this radar chart in the middle sort of provides. So that's just actually one part of it. Once this is the framework that and the roundel that everybody sees, then that's a core part of it. And then we run through that and have a process of 5 streams that go through sort of how you define value, how you then measure and evaluate it, jumping down the list, but then also how you identify the risks associated with delivering value and do something about those, which is really important because risk management, how we do risk management doesn't always lend itself to how you mitigate risks of not delivering on one of the value drivers. You can't necessarily just throw money at some of the solutions, so some of the issues that are around here and solve it. And I think quite importantly, some guidance to clients on how to other things they perhaps need to be considering from a more commercial and procurement perspective to help ensure that they can deliver on the value that they're identifying and defining as being really important. So just to talk very briefly about the value definition framework, we've based it around a capitals model, which is something that's widely used internationally. And we've had the Capitals Coalition on board with us, advising us on this sort of capitals approach and how to use it. So we've got these 4 capitals. Natural capital, I think people will understand. It's the environmental issues that we're all relatively familiar with: air quality, biodiversity, water, climate, obviously, resource use, land quality. So there are those sort of categories that we can consider as value in there. Produce capital, equally, I think we're probably fairly familiar with. It's the more economic side of things. So understanding life cycle costing, production, which is the sort of cost quality, time quality sort of elements of things. Resilience, in a broader sense to just climate, about how we adapt to change, how the assets we're building are going to respond and be resilient to future threats and future changes and needs. And then how you generate a profitable return as well. And then social and human are obviously more about the people side of things. So human is about us as individuals, and employment, health, skills and knowledge, experience. And that experience is often as us as a user of a particular asset. And then the social side of things is more about the communities of humans as society, and the interactions society has at a slightly higher level, so networks and connections, equality and diversity, and influencing consultation. So those are the 17 categories that form the roundel, and the value definition framework. So that is really the foundation that everything works from. And the sort of logic of the 5 streams that I've sort of shown you there is, Value Toolkit solves 3 key logic points. Firstly, what does value mean to me and my stakeholders in the context of the project or program I'm delivering? And that's value definition. Then going on, well, how am I going to measure whether something meets my value definition and whether I'm achieving it, is what the measurement and evaluation stream does. And then the third process logic is, well, how should I tailor my approach to delivering the project and working with the market if I'm going to maximize the chance of delivering that value? And that's where the client approach and the risk stream really come in, and give sort of suggestions on things to consider. And then the excuse me, the appointment stream then helps clients think about, well, who do I need around me in my strategic team and design teams and what have you, to help make sure I'm really rigorously considering these 3 logics as I go through my project and program. So moving on then, how can the Value Toolkit influence outcomes? What I'm going to do here is talk you through the core process piece. So that's the value definition and the measurement piece in terms of how they work. So value definition starts with the value definition framework. And this is a PDF version of what I showed on one of the earlier slides. Here's the 4 capitals and then the 17 categories down here. So value definition starts by identifying the policies and drivers that you've got, either nationally, regionally, or organisationally, that are impacting how what you need to deliver in a particular project or program. And you map those policies and drivers onto the 17 value categories. So that gives you a picture of, well, what is it I really need to be achieving here? And I think a key thing to say here, it's about the policies that you're committed to. It's very easy to look at this sort of policy landscape and go on a bit of a guilt complex of saying, oh, well, I really ought to think about this, or I really ought to be thinking about that. And before you know it, you've got a massive sort of landscape of policies that you're trying to comply with and deal with. This is really about, what are the real priorities? What am I really committed to? And are essential, critical success factors that I really need to deliver in this project if it's going to be successful. We've got a value drivers library that sort of helps you with that. At the moment, that's focused on national policy, but the workshops that Andrew referred to in his introduction are going towards helping us build a more regional sort of value drivers library as well. Once you've done that mapping of the policies and what's really important to you, what the strategic sort of objectives are you need to be delivering out of those policies to the value categories, you then start to develop a project context. And these are what we call sort of outcome statements. You might call them SMART objectives. So very specific things that this is what we are going to do to ensure this particular objective in this policy is delivered. And what you're actually doing is pulling lots of different objectives together. So one outcome will deliver on multiple different elements from the policy landscape. So you're looking to sort of develop perhaps 10 to 15 or so core outcome statements that are smart, measurable, achievable outcomes that you take forward and guide how you're going to deliver the project. You then go through a prioritization process for those outcomes, which are what drives the radar chart in the middle of the roundel in here. And that is what provides that sort of clear articulation of what the client perceives as what value means for them in the context of their particular project. So, you know, defining value isn't like defining a nice Oxford English definition of what value means. It's a very subjective term, so it's really important that you have this flexibility for clients to really be able to articulate what that value means for them in the context of what they're trying to achieve. So getting to that roundel is the core of what the value definition stream does. Moving into the measurement and evaluation stream, this might look a really complex chart, but if I gradually sort of talk you through it piece by piece. So the value toolkit is designed to run through the whole life of a project, starting in the need phase, defining what's the case for change. What is it as a client I really need to be doing? What's the problem I'm trying to solve? So starting there, which is where we recommend people are doing that value definition, creating that value profile that I've just been through. And then from there, the measurement piece comes in, and you use those outcome statements to then help you measure and evaluate at various points through optioneering, design, delivery, and operation of the asset. So through the full life of the program. And the concept that we've developed is you create scorecards for different phases of the project. So you've got a value profile that lists all these different outcomes that you can that need to be achieved, and you've defined those in a smart way. How you actually physically measure whether you are achieving them or how you are achieving them at different stages of a project will evolve. So, you know, at certain stages of a project, you might not really be able to influence a particular outcome. So in optioneering, you may not be able to be very precise at all about the number of new apprenticeships that you might be able to create as a result of this project. So in optioneering, in the optioneering scorecard, you might actually just turn off that apprenticeships outcome because you really can't influence it in terms of the options that you're considering there. Or it might be that all the options actually have the same ability to deliver. So there's no differentiation between the different options for a particular thing. So there's no point in measuring it. So each scorecard becomes a subset of that value profile that you can influence and measure at that point in time. Okay, and the idea is that you then use these scorecards to optimize your sort of concept designs as you're going through optioneering, and then ultimately compare those options to identify, well, which of the shortlist options is really going to best deliver the values that I need to achieve and the outcomes that I really want to achieve from this project. So you use that optioneering scorecard to help you do that option comparison in an objective way. You then move forward into the design process where you've probably got a single option design. So you then sort of look at the value profile again and say, right, okay, in this design phase, as I'm building the design up and going into more detail, what are the outcomes that I can influence through the design phase? And that could be about how the thing's going to get delivered, so the construction type activities, or it could be about how the thing's going to operate over its life. But thinking about, well, what is it I can influence on these outcomes through through that design process, and putting metrics against them. So how am I going to measure how I'm achieving them? And it might be the same measures you had in optioneering. It might be something more evolved and a bit more detail because you've got more data starting to come in during the design phase. So you'll start to understand maybe in more detail and can measure a little bit more precisely. So you have a scorecard that sort of helps you understand and measure the design, and the purpose of it there is to really help you go through cycles of the design, optimizing that design to make sure it is delivering against your value outcomes in the best possible way. Once you come to the end of design, you're freezing your design and you're going into your tender process at this point. So you then start to create a scorecard that are things that you want to evaluate the bidders' tenders and proposals against. And you would build this into the tender evaluation process, into your tender document, so that everybody knows what you're what you're going to be evaluating them on, and you can use that scorecard. Again, a slightly different subset to the optioneering and design, quite probably, because depending on your procurement route, there will be different things or different abilities for tenderers to influence some of the outcomes in their proposals. So you use a scorecard there to actually help you compare the tender options that come back in and help you make that decision. And then you move into the delivery phase, and you then have a delivery scorecard. Now, I see that as a very small evolution, probably from the tender scorecard, and it's probably that the target measures that you've got in the that come from the successful tenderers' promises and suggestions for delivery go into the delivery scorecard. So it becomes how they get monitored and delivered and deliver the outcome. And that gets used ultimately to sort of answer the question at the end of the construction phase. Well, have we actually delivered the value that we set out to achieve? But I would strongly recommend that you're using it as a tool throughout the delivery phase to sort of say, right, okay, how are we getting on at achieving these outcomes? And I'm not for 1 minute suggesting there that replaces your monthly KPI monitoring, because that's much more detailed than where the value profile and value measurement is sitting at. And then once you move into operation, there's then an operations scorecard that will monitor how well the asset is actually operating during its life. And that might be an annual review or something as you look at energy performance and other sort of operational characteristics. And the sort of vision is that operational scorecard can then continue to monitor on an ongoing basis how whether that asset is continuing to meet its need. And if you get to a point, or when you get to a point where you're sort of saying, well, actually this particular asset is not meeting its need anymore, we actually need to come back to the beginning of the process again and sort of say, right, okay, well, what's the case for change? What is it we need to be doing to bring this asset back into optimal performance? And then the other thing, just to sort of say, as you go through some of the options, the things that you include in the scorecards need to be the outcomes that have got a tradable level of performance. Anything that's black and white in terms of, well, the performance level is X, full stop, end of, should really drop out of being part of the value profile and become a core specification or requirement within the contract. So as you go through and narrow your design options down, you'll probably get to a point where some of the outcomes start to disappear and you don't need to measure them because it is just a black and white fail or comply fail sort of performance level, and there's no performance range or tradability that can be compared or needs to be compared. So that's the sort of concepts of what the value toolkit is trying to do and how we envisage it really fitting into a project life cycle as a tool to help clients ensure that they are delivering optimal value throughout the life of an asset. So that's my canter through, and I hope, 12:30. So yeah, I've done that in less than half an hour, which is great. So plenty of time for us to have some conversations and discussions. So I hope you've been letting the questions come in as I've been talking. So Andrew, over to you, and I'll try and answer things as best I can.
I'm just looking at actually the questions on Slido, and I can't see any at the moment. I don't know whether that's right, Abraham. So folks, please do put your questions on Slido. But what I'd like to do before we get there is just to get to the survey questions that we asked right at the front.
Yeah, sure.
And in particular, question 4, which we highlighted as one of the important. So what has your involvement been with the value toolkit so far? And there were 4 answers that you could choose from. None, you've read it or attended an event, you've trained, or you've been part of the team. So let's see what sort of audience. So 50%, Ian, have actually had no previous engagement with the value toolkit. Third, and a few have been part of the testing phase or part of the team that tests. So mostly I would say little or no knowledge then, Ian.
Seems like it. So, I hope it's been an interesting introduction. And for the 46% of you where this is your first foray into the value toolkit, apologies if it was far too quick, but I'm quite happy. Do feel free to contact me if you want to know more. Quite happily talk to people and sort of point you to some other resources.
Okay, let's go to the next question then, Abraham, if we could. How would you describe your level of knowledge? Well, that's not surprising, is it, from the answer to the previous question, but 2/3 beginner, 1/4 novice, 8% compliant, but no experts in the room, Ian, other than yourself.
I'm not sure I'd call myself an expert, to be honest, but there you go. It's a dangerous pedestal you put yourself on.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. What's your professional background? So nice split there between commercial, engineer, business case, and so on. So, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Interesting that probably the biggest proportion is commercial. I don't suppose that's a surprise, is it, with the topic of value?
No, and I think it's really encouraging to see that it's not just sort of sustainability, social value professionals that are interested in it. So, okay.
And then what's the one question? So this is the one that you were particularly interested in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So maybe you'd like to pick these off one at a time, Ian, and just comment on them.
Yeah, I'll try. Right, just give me a second to absorb them all, because it's not necessarily best to start at the top. Right, okay. So the fourth one down, understanding its use and implications. Can whoever wrote that, can I give you the opportunity to perhaps be a little bit more, to expand a little bit on that in terms of what context around its use and implications might be? I'm not quite sure how best to answer that one. So I'll answer some of the others, and if you give somebody the opportunity, either throw it in the chat here or something, so that we can just unpack that one a bit more. I'm not quite sure how best to answer that one as it's written. So I will take them from the top. Any case studies available? Not formally published as yet. We've been through a pilot testing phase, which had well, we trained about 140 people to go out and do pilot testing across industry. So this is industry practitioners doing that, and that phase ended at the end of November, and we've just finished digesting their feedback so that we can go and further refine the process before we launch formally in a few months' time. But my comms and engagement team, I know, are currently reaching out to those testers with the specific aim of developing case studies about what their experiences during that. So watch this space. There are things coming.
Okay.
I think, and there are also some key clients that we're working with as well directly that will be producing some case studies as well. Does using this tool always produce the positive results? Really, really interesting question. If you implement it in the right way, then yes, with the right rigor. I think it's something, if you try and just pay lip service to it, then no, it probably won't always produce positive results. But I think the key thing here is that, you know, this is a toolkit that enables project teams to think differently about what and how they're delivering and how they're prioritizing things. So it's designed as a toolkit to really help change the thinking. So if you don't change that thinking, then I guess it may not produce the right results. And as part of that, you know, we've identified that there is a role of value toolkit facilitator, and as part of ensuring that it produces those positive results, we're intending that facilitator role and the training course becomes a competent person scheme, so that there is a sort of qualification certification element to it, so that we know that people are applying it in the right way. And then I think following on from that and taking up the bottom one about how we will get this to stick, I think some of our involvement with some of the key clients in this directly with this so far shows that yes, it does produce positive results, because there are a number of clients that are really keen to start to, and are working with us to work out how they really embed this into their capital program delivery. And I'm talking about organisations like Ministry of Justice, Network Rail, defence infrastructure organisations. So some of the really big sort of government-based client organisations have been testing it with us, playing it with us because they like the concept, and they are now talking about how do we get this embedded into at scale in our programs. So I think that starts to perhaps slightly anecdotally, before we get case studies, say yes, it's producing positive results. And I think how we get this to stick, it really is down to clients. I was having this conversation with somebody earlier this week that there are various other tools and things we've got out there. So things like Bream or SQL and the like, where yes, you get the best results if the client is engaged in the process and wants a Bream excellent building or whatever. But actually, even if a client doesn't want that, you can use the Bream standard, the SQL standard, whatever, just as a design team or as a construction team to help you ensure you're doing the right things and delivering more sustainable outcomes to the best of your ability. But actually, with the value toolkit, I think there is less value in a designer or a contractor just going and trying to use it off their own back, because you don't get the client's insight. You really need the client's insight about what is really important to them. What are their value drivers that need to be delivered through this project? So unless you know that, I think it's really hard to really deliver best value. So I think getting it to stick, it really does need that client level adoption to it. Unlike some of the others where you can still get outputs from.
Okay.
I don't know whether we've seen anything about that fourth bullet point, but I really don't know quite how to answer that in a succinct way without a bit more detail. But
okay. What about number 3? I don't think you've covered that one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I jumped over that. Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, I think is the answer to that. And I think what's really important, one of the other things that one of my colleagues, who actually I think is on the call today, I think I've just seen his name on the attendance list, is working around the idea of competence frameworks and competence profiles. And one of the things that we want to try and do over the next few months is start to talk more to the professional institutions about how we ensure that the concepts of value-based decision making, so not necessarily the detailed value toolkit itself, but the concepts of value-based decision making that we've established, how we get those incorporated into core competence profiles. So when you're going through your professional qualifications, whether that will be RIBA, ICE, iStruct, RICS, whoever, you're getting this concept and this core competence of value-based decision making in your qualifications, and that in itself then I think cascades into teaching. And both myself and Robert, my training colleague, we're both already incorporating it into some of the visiting lectures we both do, guest lectures we do for universities. So there's already some universities getting bits of this in there, and yes, I think it's core. It's at its heart, this is a cultural change that needs to get embedded. So anything that helps that has to be beneficial.
Ian, thank you. I've got some questions here in my system, but before I go to those, Abraham, do we have any in the Slido Q&A? Yes, we do. So let's do those first. Can we have them one at a time, please, Abraham? Makes it easier. So who do you see operating the toolkit? Client, employee's agent? Ian Nicholson, there's a job for you.
I'm not Superman. I can't go everywhere. Interesting question. So I've already talked about this role of value toolkit facilitator. So there's a specific sort of competency level that we want within the team. Where within the team it comes from, I don't think is really important. What I think is important from us, is that it's not a new role in the team. So this isn't about adding an extra person to a team. It's about making sure that the knowledge and competence is within the team. So I think what the value toolkit brings, it can be brought by somebody who's already in a team, as long as they've got the right knowledge and training. Some clients, I think, will probably look to try and do it in-house, but I think lots of the consultancies, and these would include from the big multidisciplinary consultants to the smaller sort of multidisciplinary technical consultancies, but also specialist consultancies, environmental, social value type consultancies. I think there's a whole range of sort of advisory roles that that can operate it. Potentially contractors, but my concern about contractors is whether through procurement routes, whether they get involved too late to really be able to influence the value piece and be in the right conversations.
Okay, just to let you know, Ian, there's some comments coming up in the chat box.
Yeah, that's why I hesitated. I got distracted by a little window that popped up. It was a question.
Yeah, so
yeah.
I think the people interested in your contact details, if you're happy to pass them on in the chat box.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
I think
the message about will the presentation be available? Yes, we put all the presentations up on the Constructing Excellence website and indeed on Leaders Meet's website.
Yeah,
so,
and
yes.
what I'll do as well, Andrew, I'm very aware that I gave a very high level brief staccatoed overview of the toolkit. I'll drop you a link to the overview document, as well, a PDF document that's available on our website, so people can go and look at that and read a bit more detail, more comprehensively than the sort of parachuting in that I did at various bits.
Okay, Abraham, let's go to the next question, can we, please? So are there any case studies on its use yet, or is it too early? We sort of covered that.
We covered that, I think. Yeah, they're coming.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question, then, Abraham. How can we drive uptake in an industry that is still fixated on a narrow definition of value? Are ESG and CSR key drivers? Question mark.
The second question, yes, they are. ESG. If you're in the private sector, the sort of ESG agenda that comes from the investment world is very much a key driver, because they're expressing value across those some of those value categories that I described earlier. So putting those into this framework will help ensure that you deliver on that return for investors.
I'm assuming that narrow definition of value actually means price.
I'm assuming, yeah, this traditional value for money. There's a conversation I had with one client recently. I was in a workshop with a client, and they were sort of saying, well, we've got this benefits realization process that does all of this. Why do we need the toolkit? And they started to show details of the benefits realization process, and their definition of benefits was time, cost, quality related value for money. And it wasn't the broader piece. So yeah, we have to be really careful in terms of, people talk about value, but they have different definitions.
Okay, let's have the next question, please, Abraham. So, is it mandated on central government funded schemes yet?
Interesting question. It depends how you want to describe the mandate. So Value Toolkit is referenced in the construction playbook on a and the construction playbook is comply or explain, or comply and justify, whatever. So in that respect, you can say it's mandated. Some of my colleagues are engaged with HM Treasury directly to talk about and try and get some form of, not mandate, because I don't think they would go this far, but some statement from Treasury about how the Value Toolkit aligns with the Green Book and the whole business case process. Because one thing we are seeing is that we see that as quite a key statement, so people know that this thing, if they start to put value profiles and the like into business cases as part of the Green Book process, they want to know that they're not wasting their time, and that Treasury will know what it means and understand it. So we are, I think, is there a formal mandate other than playbook? No. Treasury we're working on, we're getting some positive signs from them in terms of what they're thinking. But then individual clients are starting to, as I sort of said, are starting to really look at how they embed it. So they've been involved with us testing it, so putting it on an individual project and having a play with us, if you like, helping us test the concepts, are liking what they're seeing and saying, right, okay, well, we want to start to scale this up. So I think, you know, we're starting to see that happen at different levels as of central government as well. So will we get one single explicit mandate? Probably not, but I think there's lots of different elements there that sort of say it's an accepted process.
Right. So
okay.
Comment here. There we go.
Cool. Okay.
Implication wasn't a question, but what I hope to get out of the presentation, actually implementation, not implication.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's fine. Well, I hope I've helped you get that out of the presentation. If not, do contact me, and quite happy to have a conversation with you and talk to you some more.
Okay. I've got some more questions which I'd like to pose that have come in through another medium.
Yeah.
So how would you suggest you get the most out of the Value Toolkit? So are people listening in for the first time, how are they going to maximize the benefit from their point of view, do you think?
Good question. I think starting early in a project, working with your client to understand it, because having said that, you know, designers and contractors working on their own can't use it. I think for those people that are they're working with clients in an advisory and particularly strategic type of advisory capacity, I think, you know, there is an element of going and proposing this to clients to make sure that they're aware of it. And I think helping people through the process is really, really important. And I think the key thing is as well vision. Now, what do people really want to get out of this? As I said earlier, if you only pay lip service to it, this is going to become a bit of a bureaucracy that's not, and paper chase that's not really helpful at all. But actually, if you take the real spirit of it and people are really committed to that, driving something different and delivering culture change and a different approach to delivering projects, then I think that is really where the value add comes in this process.
There's an interesting one here that says, why do we need another toolkit? I could probably answer that myself. For someone that's been involved in the change agenda since Latham and Egan in the 90s, from my perspective, Ian, the reason we need another one is because we haven't made it stick yet. It hasn't taken root, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think there's different levels to that. I think at that fundamental sort of change level, the Latham Egan farmer type report level, I agree. You know, we've Latham and Egan in particular talked about some of this stuff, and no, we just haven't done it. But I think there's some different drivers now. I think where we are in the whole climate piece and climate emergency and things has brought a very different focus to where we were sort of 20 years ago when those guys were doing their reports. And I just sense and probably hope that's the critical difference, that there's something.
No, I agree with you. I think that we're facing probably the two biggest issues in my working life: climate crisis and building safety.
Yeah.
And they need to feature very heavily, I think, in everyone's value determination. So I agree with that. But
I think if I can just carry on with that one, if people look by toolkit mean more detailed toolkits, things like BREEAM, SQL, national TOMs, sort of social value calculators and all of those sorts of detailed things. Value Toolkit is doing something different to that, in that they're all really detailed measurement pieces for the asset that you're delivering and making sure you're delivering the asset as well as you can. What the Value Toolkit does which is different, is that it's a decision support tool. So it enables you to take the critical elements, critical measures from those other toolkits, put them into this framework to help you support that decision-making process. The Value Toolkit isn't a new reporting tool. It's not designed to be used at that level. So it has got, yes, it overlaps in its technical content, with lots of other toolkits, but it's not doing the same job as these other toolkits do.
In terms of the pilot projects, have you had any sort of key learning points yet come out? Is it too early to tell, or?
There's lots of learning that's sort of come out of it. One is actually that scorecard approach. That's probably Well, it's probably the first time I've shown that slide to a public forum, actually. I think, yeah, how we've done measurement and evaluation has evolved through the pilot phase a lot as we were getting some initial feedback and questions. Well, you've written this down. How do you actually do it? And that's caused us to rethink some of that. There's some interesting stuff going on around the front end, around that policy mapping. And interestingly, we've started with that, well, what's the national policy? And we've created a national drivers thing, where actually what we found is what's most important to people is actually the organizational and local policy drivers are actually more important to people to get mapped than actually the national policy level. So we're looking at how that front end piece changes, because that mapping can be a really massive exercise if you're not careful. So no, we're still looking at the feedback really in there to see, well, how do we simplify and streamline that front end to make it really pragmatic to deliver.
Okay, well, I've got one more question. Is there one challenge, or if there's one challenge in the value toolkit, what is it? Put you on the spot.
Yeah. I think one of the key things is it's potentially a challenge, because I often say the good thing about the value toolkit is that it's flexible in how you use it. The bad thing about the value toolkit is it's flexible. It's great that we're not giving a very strict black and white mandate. This is how you must do it. This is what you have to value. So we're not saying that carbon has to be in there, or job creation has to be in there, or whatever. It's very much there for people to sort of say what's important to them in that context. But what that potentially means is there isn't necessarily a lack of there isn't necessarily a great degree of consistency of the metrics that come out at the end, because lots of people sort of talk about industry level benchmarking. Can the value toolkit do that? Well, yes, if we have a bit more standardization in terms of what's getting measured. So I think that's a challenge that I think is potentially for another day, because this is potentially a really big cultural change here, and there's lots of other things that the value toolkit could do, and I think benchmarking is one of those. But I think we've got to get people into thinking about this, what value means first, and then we may well in a year or so's time start to get to a point where, okay, carbon should be included in this way, or apprenticeship should be included in this way, or building safety should be included in a particular way, whatever, so that we can then start to develop some benchmarking. But that's a really interesting one, because I get the need for benchmarking.
Put you on the spot, Ian. Abraham, do we have any other questions that have come in subsequently on the system? No, nothing more. Okay, in which case, Ian, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Much appreciated. Yeah. Abraham, can we go to the slide then about the survey and so on?
Yeah. I've just put into the chat my email address. Okay, I noticed there was a comment there about my contact details. So feel free to drop me an email. Just say where you met me on this webinar, so I know who you are. I'm going to put some context to where you're.
There you are, folks. From. You heard it from Ian. So if you could go back to Slido now, folks, it would be appreciated. Slido.com, #LN040222. And as always, we're asking you to fill in a feedback survey. It's nice for us to know what works, what doesn't work, what floats your boat, what doesn't, so that we can plan our future agenda. So if you could go to that, it would be much appreciated. Doesn't take very long, literally 60 seconds. Thank you. Abraham, next slide. Thank you. We have changed and simplified the ability now to get certificates for CPD attendance at these events. So a digital certificate of attendance will now be issued following the event through MyPro Plus. There's no need now for you to go through the process that we asked you to before. However, what we do ask you to do is to create your own free account so you can store all your certificates for future use, and that you can find at www.mypropass.co.uk. So go and sign yourself in, get the free account. You will automatically be sent a certificate, but then you can store them all with MyProPass. So we've hopefully, once you've signed in, got your free account, we've made life hopefully more simple for you. Now then, I hope next, Abraham, we've got some details about next week. So interestingly, we've been talking about leadership and culture change with you, Ian. We're going to have a similar discussion next week with the Building Safety First agenda with Gary, who, of course, Gary Townsend Villa, you met, were very kindly also presented for the presentations and the seminars and summits last week. But next week, we're going to be concentrating on building a safer future and the champions that have already been created, benchmarking what they're doing and so on and so forth. So it's moving on with that building safety agenda next week, folks, which I'm sure you'll all agree is of equal importance to what we've been talking about today. So I think that's my final slide, isn't it, Abraham? Just leaves me to thank Abraham for hosting it so admirably, as he always does, from Leaders Meets. And you can pick up these presentations, not just today, but all the presentations that go back nearly 2 years on the Leaders Meets website. And Ian, once again, thank you to you.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Thank you for giving your time and your knowledge to share with us all. Just for me now to say have a great weekend, and I'll see you all again next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
All right. Thanks now.
Bye-bye.